It sounds strange, but I feel so angry and depressed that I just need to vent, even if no one reads it. So I'm a 17-year-old girl, and my parents forgot about me on their wedding day. My parents were together for about 25 years but never married. That's why, when my 50-year-old father proposed to my 49-year-old mother on their anniversary, they always celebrated it on the day my mother found out she was pregnant with my older sister, even though they were already together. Everyone, including me, was thrilled and celebrated with great joy. They got engaged back in February. They immediately dove into wedding preparations, deciding almost immediately to have a small celebration in Hawaii with just their closest family and friends. Almost immediately, my mother asked my 25-year-old sister to be her maid of honor, and my father asked my 22-year-old brother to be his best man. I wasn't surprised or offended by this. My sister had always been a mommy's girl. They loved spending time together, shopping, socializing, and had a very close bond. It was the same with my dad and brother. They always played soccer together, tinkered with cars, and my dad even coached my brother's high school team. I always seemed to be on the outside, trying to join in with family hobbies and groups, but I was constantly pushed away. Maybe they sensed my interest wasn't genuine, or maybe they simply didn't care. Either way, I was used to being the last and least important in the family. My mom had a sister. My dad had a brother. My parents were close to each other. And my brother and sister were closer to each other than to me. So I was very lonely and isolated in my own home. During wedding preparations, I was initially offered the chance to be the flower girl, but my sister thought that role would be more suited to her daughter, and the idea was quickly discarded. Later, my maternal grandmother suggested I read a poem or give a short speech at the ceremony, but my parents declined, saying they wanted a modest wedding, and that a saccharine and banal speech wouldn't fit their vision. That's their exact phrase. I still tried to remain calm, though it was painful to realize that I would be the only family member who wouldn't be participating in the wedding ceremony at all, and wouldn't have any role on the day. As the wedding approached, my parents and siblings became increasingly preoccupied with the planning. I noticed that my mother hadn't invited me to choose a dress, and that I was constantly left out of the discussions about the venue or details of the event. Then I decided to see if they would notice that I wasn't being involved in the preparations at all, and I remained silent, expecting them to ask me at least something about the wedding. But that never happened. The wedding day was 3 weeks ago, at the end of August. The day before the flight, my mother casually asked me if I had packed my things, since we couldn't be late for the airport. I told her straight out that I hadn't prepared anything. She was confused for a few seconds, then attacked me for being unprepared. Then I asked her if I even had a ticket, and her face turned pale. Yes, they hadn't even bought me a ticket, and I'm not sure if I had accommodations booked there. Even though I was the only person in the family without a stable income, I work as a part-time nanny. My parents bought first-class tickets for my brother, sister, and a couple of friends invited to the wedding, but they forgot about me. My mother told me not to make a big deal out of it, and that they could find me a cheap ticket at the last minute from some low-cost airline. I just replied, and then, what? I don't even have a dress for the ceremony. She and her sister had bought them for themselves and all the other women months ago, but I wasn't invited. Then my father came in and told me to stop whining, that I'd never been a girly girl and could wear anything. I was angry because, even though I'm not the most feminine girl in the world, I would have loved to be a part of such an important event in my parents' lives. It wasn't about the dress, but about the fact that I'd been excluded from literally everything that had been happening for the past few months. We all had a fight. They called me selfish and accused me of deliberately keeping a low profile so they'd forget about me, as if that was even an excuse for ignoring my own child. In the end, they said that if I was going to continue like this, I should skip the wedding altogether. So I defiantly replied, "Fine," and went to my room. The next morning, they flew to Hawaii without me. The ceremony was very small, but they flooded Instagram and Facebook with photos of what a perfect and magical week it had been. People quickly noticed I wasn't in the pictures and asked my parents why. They replied that, unfortunately, I'd contracted COVID before the trip and had to stay home. My blood boiled, I don't know why, but that was the last straw. I decided to get tested for COVID and posted a photo of my negative result with the caption, "Not sick at all." They just forgot about me. I tagged everyone who'd inquired about my absence from the wedding and the trip, as well as everyone I'd invited. In the comments, I wrote that my parents had literally forgotten about me until the very day of departure and had practically told me not to go. Most people sided with me, while others didn't believe me and thought there had to be more to the story. But one thing was clear. I'd completely ruined my parents' perfect wedding, and that day was overshadowed by my confession. At first, I felt a sense of accomplishment for standing up for myself, but after a barrage of messages from my family calling me names, followed by vicious attacks for my childish antics and spoiled behavior, my sense of pride quickly evaporated and I felt terrible. I hate my family, and I hate this house. But I'm a minor and can't leave yet. Still, I feel like I could have handled the situation differently, and now I'm so depressed that I'm starting to question everything I've done. From not speaking up sooner to putting everything on display, I also feel guilty about the disconnect between me and my family, and wonder if maybe I could have done more. I did something wrong by ruining my parents' wedding when they forgot about me. Hi everyone, I wanted to write an update earlier, but I'm still a little torn. However, given the overwhelming response my post received and the number of people who left comments and messaged me personally, I decided to share the latest developments. First of all, I want to thank everyone who commented on my post and shared their experiences or opinions about my situation. Thank you so much. Just a few days ago, I barely had the strength to get out of bed, and my family's words made me believe I was to blame for everything that happened. But seeing your responses and support, I felt at least a little confident in the rightness of my actions and feelings towards my family. I still struggle with guilt and depression, but when I start to fall into a pit, I think about how many strangers have stood by my side and tried to calm down. Thanks to your advice, I finally decided to call my grandmother and tell her the whole story. My grandmother, 77, did not attend the wedding. She lives several states away and has mobility issues, so she no longer travels. We visited her in the spring, and that's when she suggested I read a poem at the ceremony. But that was the last time I saw her before all this happened. She was always very kind to me, and used to reproach my parents for favoritism. But she found it difficult to actively interfere in my upbringing. She lives too far away, yes, and I was always worried about bothering her because of her age and health. She had a mild stroke a few years ago. She's recovered now, but I still worry about her. Anyway, I called her and told her everything that happened with the wedding and how my parents hadn't even bought me a ticket to go with them. She came to the same conclusion as most of the commenters. It was simply impossible to forget me. They had done it on purpose. I sobbed into the phone, telling her how I felt, how this had been going on my whole life, how I was feeling the consequences of it all, and most importantly, that I needed to leave home. She was incredibly kind and comforted me, telling me I had nothing to worry about anymore because she was completely on my side. She told me to calm down a bit, but to make plans for the future and promise to help. After that conversation, which lasted about 2 hours, I felt better and decided to listen to my grandmother and start doing something about it before the next school year. I have a friend who is planning to rent a studio apartment near our future campus. She has a great relationship with her parents, but she has 5 younger siblings and wants more independence, so she decided to move out. I asked her if I could move in with her temporarily and promised to pay the rent once I got a job. She immediately agreed and told me not to worry about rent or anything else until I got back on my feet. We both burst into tears when I told her everything about my parents' wedding. It all happened a couple of days ago, and I was planning to write an update then. But my grandmother called my parents and siblings to lecture them about the way they treated me. Afterwards, my brother sent me a message with a half-hearted apology, saying he didn't know I wasn't included on the trip and just thought I'd be bored. And then I posted the photo just to cause drama. My sister, on the other hand, yelled at me, accusing me of constantly trying to publicize my problems and blame them on my family, even though they were completely innocent. Things got weird with my parents after they returned from the trip. At first, they were yelling and furious at me, and then we just started ignoring each other. After my grandmother called, they came into my room and told me that if I wanted to end this whole thing, I should shut up, and that everything would have died down long ago if I'd kept my mouth shut. I simply asked them to leave, and then called my grandmother again and told her what had happened. Then she said that she and my uncle had already bought tickets and were planning to fly to me. To be honest, I was scared. My grandmother isn't in the best health, and such a trip would be a huge strain on her. I know how difficult it is for her to fly, so I tried to talk her out of it, assuring her I could handle it myself. But she wouldn't listen and said she should have spoken to her parents a long time ago and wanted to see me. I'm completely on edge because I feel guilty again, like I'm forcing her to make a long, difficult trip because of me. And I think maybe I should have handled this myself. But I really want to see her, and most of all, I want to hug her right now. It's a bit of a relief that my uncle, my mother's older brother, will be coming with her. But I'm really worried that Grandma will get overtired and something will happen to her. That would be the last straw. They're arriving tomorrow, and they haven't told my parents about their visit yet. Grandma asked me to keep it a secret until she arrives. I hope she can make my parents realize their mistake, or at least help me tell them that I'm moving out very soon and plan to completely cut off contact with them. I don't know, I'm worried that she has to do so much for me and that I'm bothering her, but I'm incredibly grateful and love her for everything she does. Update 2. Hello everyone. I'm so sorry it's been so long since I've written or responded to comments. As you can imagine if you've read my previous posts, it's been a busy week, to say the least. A huge number of people have written to me, commented on my post, and I simply haven't had time to respond to anyone until today, and I'm so sorry. You've all been incredibly kind and thoughtful about my story, and it's truly been both eye-opening and terrifying to see how many people have experienced similar stories of neglect and abuse. I just want to thank you for taking the time to write. A few kind words to a stranger online. I'll pick up where I left off. My grandmother called and said she was coming to see me and help. I was really stressed about this because it's very difficult for my grandmother to travel, and she had to go to great lengths to make this trip, and I felt responsible for it, because she was going for me. She arrived early Monday morning with my uncle, and I went to the airport to meet her. Honestly, it was an incredibly powerful and emotional moment. As soon as I saw her, I threw myself into her arms and burst into tears. I don't even know if I was able to say anything at that moment because I was crying so hard, and I had so many words. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being so kind to me, for supporting me. I'm sorry for making you end this trip. I can't stand being at home. I don't know if my parents love me, but I know you do. Am I the product of infidelity? All of this, along with guilt and anxiety, crashed over me the moment I saw her, but she held me tight and kept telling me everything would be okay. My uncle hugged us too. I don't know how long we stood like that. Probably quite a long time, until my uncle said it was time for us to go. We took a taxi to their hotel. My grandmother's eyes were wet with tears, and I could feel her breathing was strained, which really scared me. But she still hugged me and smiled the whole way. She'd booked a double room in advance so I could stay with her for the next few days. Once they were settled in and I'd calmed down a bit, we sat down and I spilled it all. The years of neglect and emotional abuse, how bad I felt after the trip and all those years in general, how my parents tried to make me feel guilty for everything that happened, how I'm afraid of the future, but my priority now is to leave this house, even at the cost of my education. I've already arranged to move in with a friend and I'm looking for a job. I also told them about this post, and how some people think I'm the product of an affair, and that I've begun to suspect it myself. It was very difficult, and I could see how deeply my grandmother and uncle were hurt by what I told them. But they constantly comforted me and made me feel safe enough to open up fully. When I poured out all my worries, my grandmother assured me I had nothing more to worry about, and that she would always be there for me. First, she reassured me that I wasn't the product of infidelity, and that both my parents were thrilled when my mother became pregnant with me. For my mother, infidelity had always been a defining moment, and she believed it was the same for my father. It turns out the favoritism started when I was about 3 or 4 years old. My parents constantly complained about having a small child in the house, and were irritated that they could involve the older children in their errands. But not me. Plus, I was incredibly shy and whiny, and they had no patience for that, which made me very different from my brother and sister. She said she knew my parents had put more than enough money aside for my college education. They were quite wealthy, so it hadn't bothered me before, until I thought they might cut me off. But if they tried to avoid paying for my education, my grandmother would take it upon herself and wouldn't let me drop out because of money. She also said she'd help me with rent and give me a little money to get me through the initial stages of moving. She was incredibly generous, and I thanked her for everything, but also admitted that the experience had been an eye-opener. I never realized how economically privileged I'd been my whole life. For all their faults, my parents had always left me short financially. I attended a private school, received a fairly large monthly allowance, and have had a bank card for several years now, and they've never objected to my spending. But reading the stories here, I realized how unlucky I've been up until now, and that my dependence on them made me vulnerable. I could lose everything in an instant. Now I want to be independent, not just from my parents, but from everyone. I feel like I need to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. Honestly, writing this and rereading other people's stories about truly terrible situations makes me feel like I've been a spoiled idiot my whole life. My grandmother insisted that I accept her help as long as I need it, and I agreed, but I still plan to look for a job and try to manage on my own. We rested briefly at a hotel after a tough morning, but in the afternoon we called a taxi and went to my house. My parents were extremely surprised to see me with my grandmother and uncle, but before they could say anything, Grandma told me to gather everything I needed while they talked. I rushed upstairs and heard Grandma and Uncle scolding my parents for everything I'd been through because of them. At first, I heard my parents trying to justify themselves, but then they fell silent. When I came downstairs with 2 suitcases and a backpack filled to the brim with everything important I had in my room, they were all sitting in the living room. My father was red as a beet, my mother was sobbing like a child, and upon seeing me, she held out her hands and said, "I'm sorry," but I only coldly replied, "Leave it." My father said I didn't have to be such a jerk, to which both Grandma and Uncle Haram told him to shut up. At that moment, I left the house and waited for a taxi outside. At the hotel, my grandmother assured me I wouldn't have to go back to them and said my parents had promised her they wouldn't question my college fees. Furthermore, they were planning a lavish birthday party for me as compensation for the wedding mess and wanted to give me a car as an apology. But my grandmother didn't buy that bullshit because it was obvious they were making it all up as they went along just to save face. Neither the party nor the car could make up for everything I'd been through. Apparently, my mother finally broke down when my grandmother told her I'd even questioned whether I was the product of infidelity, and then she burst into tears. But my grandmother replied, what else did they expect when they'd excluded me from all family events for years, since childhood? She said she'd make sure they paid for my education, unless I decided to cut off contact completely and let her pay for everything until I got back on my feet. I asked her to do just that. I felt awkward, knowing it wasn't her responsibility, but I didn't want anything more from my parents. Although my grandmother is quite well off herself, she's not as rich as they are. But she assured me everything would be fine, and that everything I was getting would simply be deducted from my mother's inheritance. The next day, my friend, her parents, and I all went to the apartment we were planning to move into. And as soon as we walked in, my grandmother said, "Absolutely not. I knew from the photos that the studio was very small and dirty. But in person, it was even worse. Water leaks, mold in the bathroom and kitchenette, rust on the old appliances. I knew all this beforehand, but I thought I could somehow endure it. At least for the time being. But what the adults pointed out, and what finally made my friend and I change our minds, was that the studio was on the ground floor in a bad area. The building looked unsafe, and there were bullet holes in the walls. I didn't even know what it was until my friend's father explained it. Then my friend's grandmother and parents said they'd help us find an apartment in a better location and cover some of the expenses. My friend and I want to be independent, but we realize that with our future minimum wages in such an expensive area, we won't be able to afford anything decent. So our plan now is to look for a 2-bedroom apartment, pay what we were planning on paying for the studio, and my friend's parents and my grandmother will cover the difference. I realize we're just spoiled to expect such help, but after seeing that studio with my own eyes, I truly wouldn't have felt safe there. My friend's parents, who were aware of what I was going through, said I could stay with them until we found a decent apartment. I'm incredibly grateful for that, because my grandmother is leaving in a couple of days, and I've been staying with her in a hotel this whole time. It turns out my friend, her parents, and her grandmother had discussed everything in advance, so I would have a safe place to stay until we found an apartment, which we still have yet to find. I cried when I saw people rallying around me to help. Since then, I've been gradually moving the things I left behind from my parents and settling into my friend's place. My mom cries and apologizes every time I come home. Even my dad has said he's sorry, but I remain cold and distant with them. My sister called and said Mom was in terrible shape, and I was a jerk for what she did, but I immediately hung up and blocked her. I was about to block my brother too, but I saw a long message from him, apologizing over and over again for everything he did, and for not noticing how badly my parents treated me. He wrote that after my grandmother's conversation, he rethought a lot and realized he was wrong to think I didn't want to go, and that all this time he'd been allowing my parents to exclude me. I briefly thanked him for his words, but wrote that I needed space and wasn't ready to accept his apology yet. I have a feeling he might be sincere, because he's never been mean to me like a sister, more like indifferent. But right now, I still think it's right to keep him at a distance. Maybe in the future, he'll show he's no better, and then I'll block him. But as long as he respects my boundaries, it's easier for me to leave at least some bridge than to completely sever ties. I also made an appointment with a therapist who works with adolescents who have experienced neglect, and my first appointment is next week. Again, my grandmother is paying for everything, and this further pushes me to find a job as soon as possible to take this burden off her shoulders, even though she constantly says she's happy about it. That's how things are right now. I don't know if I'll write more updates. Maybe when I start school or move into an apartment. For now, I'm just trying to enjoy time with my grandmother and uncle, learning to let go of the guilt and depression that have plagued my life for so long. I want to thank this community again for its kindness and support. To everyone who wrote their stories about being kicked out of home or having to become independent too early, you helped me feel less alone and understand that things can get better if I work at it. Yes, I feel a little spoiled, having such strong support in the form of my grandmother, uncle, and friend, but you were right. Asking for help was the best decision I could have made. By opening up to those who love me and to you, I literally saved myself. Thank you. I'm more grateful than I can express.